Thank you for tuning in to this demo presentation on gender, sexuality, and the climate crisis, an overview. I have honestly been looking forward to doing this demo for a few days because I'm very interested in using my website to merge the political and the personal. And I like to use this presentation as a way of explaining some of my own personal connections to the climate crisis and what has actually uh, helped to mold and shape my own perspective. And a huge part of this is my experience here in Philadelphia at the Attic Youth Center. I used to work there. I used to attend the Attic Youth Center, LGBTQ um, youth space for, I think, kids aged 13 to 21 or 25 or something. And wow, I'm thinking back now, it's been over 20 years. So kind of aging myself, but it's okay. There was a program at the Attic called the Bryson Institute. And at the Bryson Institute, we would go to nonprofits, corporate spaces, and other institutions and do trainings for people who had literally never met an LGBTQ person in their life, apparently. Some of these people claimed to have never had met anyone. And because of the shifting culture in corporate America, and also in nonprofits at that time, this is about the year 2001 or so, people and institutions were very much engaged in, getting gays, lesbians, trans people in front of an audience in their institution. And we would tell our personal story. We would say, yes, we are humans just like you, essentially. Very interesting work. Hearing people's responses, seeing that it did make a difference for them to see you in real life as someone who's an actual person and not a stereotype from TV or the magazine or whatever. And I want to say that beyond my own personal connection to this, what this presentation really is about is helping us to understand that this idea of queerness or homosexuality being unnatural is totally ridiculous. Nature is queer. Nature is queer, right? Nature does not conform to our Barbie-kin homo hetero binaries. Nature supports diversity in all of its forms, and so should we, right? And I have to make because of what's happening with the politics around this right now, we have to make a very strong statement that trans identity is natural as well. There's nothing unnatural about being trans, just like there's nothing unnatural about being gay or lesbian or whatever. We have to start clearly and strongly speaking out against things that we know are not true, right? We know that there are queer relationships in nature. We know that there is homosexuality in nature. We know that there's gender. There are animals that change their gender in nature. So this idea that when these things manifest in human society, that there's somehow weird or wrong, or that's totally ridiculous. And hopefully, after you see my full presentation, it'll be 100% obvious what I'm talking about. But in this demo presentation, what I want to get into is some of the core concepts that I'm going to cover in the longer presentation, right? And one of these concepts has to do with the fact that, the oppression of women, the oppression of sexual minorities is a huge part of the climate crisis. This picture on the left is a picture from an action camp in Canada where people were blockading this pipeline that they did not want to go through their land. And one of the reasons why they didn't want that pipeline is because these pipelines and all of these fossil fuel companies, they bring death and destruction into these territories, especially for women. And that's why you see these red dresses. It represents the missing and murdered Indigenous women. And many of them were murdered by people working for these oil and gas companies. Either that or just random people who decided to prey on them because they viewed them as disposable. And on the right-hand side, you see what's happening today in Ukraine because of the war. And it's been happening before the war as well. Whatever you see, natural gas and oil, you'll find human trafficking, sexual exploitation, And now we see in Ukraine, especially because of this war, millions of refugees, and they're being preyed upon, especially women and children. This is an unfortunate aspect of our reality. Fossil fuels and sexual violence go hand in hand. Extraction is patriarchal violence. The rape of the earth is not a metaphor. It's not a theoretical issue. One of the books that underpins this presentation is called Long Before Stonewall, Histories of Same-Sex Sexuality in Early America. This book was so influential to me because there's a woman or a person, I'm not sure how they identify, but their name is Gunlog Fur, and they wrote a very interesting essay in this book that talks about how Native Americans view gender. And so we're going to get into this in a longer presentation, but essentially what she's saying in this essay is what she's saying in this quote. Native American understandings of the origins and organization of gender suggest that gender need not be viewed as emanating from or dependent upon biological sex. Now, if people knew this thousands of years ago, hundreds of years ago, why do we have such a hard time accepting it today? We're going to unpack some of that as well. The abuse of women is well known in history and tells you a lot about what is happening to our earth. This is LaDonna Brave Bull Allard from the Standing River Sioux. She was very prominent during the No DAPL protests. And what she says here is precisely true. The way women are treated says a lot about what's happening to our earth. The earth is viewed as a resource. Women are viewed as a resource. And how are women being treated in Europe? I think this is important to understand because of the era of colonization, where many of our indigenous practices and indigenous ways of being have been either disrupted or totally, erased. And the treatment of women that we're used to in our society is not how things always were. But if you look at the history of Europe specifically, and we have to do that because, we're all speaking, most of us, European languages. I'm speaking English. Most people on this continent are speaking either English, French, or Spanish. And this is true for countries all over the world. So we have to look at the source of some of this dysfunction, which is Europe. And, the source of some of this patriarchal violence that has spread all over the world. If you look at European history, the Scold's Bridle from Scotland and England, I think is a quintessential example of the hell that women were living in Europe. And of course, people wanted to get away from there. You're wearing this metal thing on your face and it fits into your mouth in a certain way where you cannot speak and you're drooling and it's painful. And you could walk around like this being led by your husband on a leash. And you had the witch burnings. And the witch burnings, as we should know by now, were a way of targeting women with property and women who were, weird or witches or whatever. They were targeted specifically by the Catholic Church. This isn't normal, and this didn't happen in most places around the world. Most places around the world, women were not being tortured like this. You had the corsets, which gets into beauty standards and so forth. We have to understand that there is something seriously wrong within European culture when it comes to how women were treated. And that most indigenous people were not living like that. They were not treating their women this way. Women were free for the most part on this continent before European settlers arrived. Part of what I'm going to get into in this presentation is looking way back at how did we arrive at this situation that we're living in with this patriarchal violence, with people not being free to do what they want to do. We have to look back in history to understand why these things are happening. And I think looking at ancient Rome is really important because in ancient Rome, Roman women and girls were considered to be part of their fathers or once married husbands or husbands' property holdings. So think about that. All the way back in ancient Rome, women and girls were considered to be property. So how do you think that translates into how people were treated in society? And how does that differ from how women and girls are treated here in the Americas and other places and other indigenous cultures around the world? Were they viewed as property or were they viewed as human beings? We're going to get into that in the longer presentation as well. I love this quote from Ursula K. Le Guin because it gets to the core of what we're going to discuss in this longer presentation as well, the role of civilization. Civilized man says, I am self, I am master. All the rest is other, outside, below, underneath, subservient. I own, I use, I explore, I exploit, I control. What I do is what matters. What I want is what matter is for. I love that. What I want is what matter is for. Think about that. Think about that line specifically in connection with the climate crisis and with extraction, with oil exploration, with deforestation. What I want is what matter is for. Everything that's out here, that everything that we can see, everything that exists, some groups of men decided that this is just for them to exploit and to use. All right. I am that I am, and the rest is women and wilderness to be used as I see fit. This is definitely a quote that, I mean, I could spend 2 hours talking about this one quote, but we're going to unpack this some more in the longer presentation. This is my friend Layla Abdel Rahim. Very, very interesting person. You know, I'm going to talk more about her work in my presentations as well, because she's extremely interesting. She talks about the concept of domestication. And we can't understand what's happening in our world today without understanding this concept of domestication and understanding that domestication is a sustained multi-generational relationship. And normally it's between humans and animals. But what Layla is helping us to understand is that humans have been domesticated as well, especially women, right? So here's the official definition of domestication. It's a multi-generational relationship in which humans assume a significant degree of control over the reproduction and care of another group of organisms to secure a more predictable supply of resources from that group. So it's all about controlling the reproduction of this group to guarantee a predictable supply of resources. So when Layla is saying here that the domestication of sexuality provided this hierarchical structure of specialization, what she is saying that the domestication of women is sort of the foundation for all of this dysfunction that we're seeing today. The domestication of their sexuality, the way that you had to view a woman as just being like a baby making factory. And that's how many of them were treated. They were treated as property who were only there to produce babies, all right? So that's why Layla says at the end here, before everything else, therefore, civilization is about breeding. That is the selective breeding of crops, animal husbandry, and of human resources. Definitely something that we're going to unpack a lot more in the longer presentation. And I want to end this by saying that the people we're seeing emerging today, like Vanessa Nakate from Africa, Greta Thunberg in Europe, Vandana Shiva has been around for a long time. This is what's so necessary right now. This is what is so inspiring to see this, because I do believe what Vandana Shiva says here is true. We are either going to have a future where women lead the way to make peace with the earth, or we are not going to have a human future at all.